Yes, Representative McDermott.
Mr. Speaker, I'm in opposition to this.
Opposition, please proceed.
I'd first like to state that I'd like my comments from the previous reading to be inserted now.
So ordered.
And just a few more comments. I failed, Mr. Speaker, to convince my colleagues that these words mean anything, and I deeply regret my failure to convey the term foster parent connotes a term of endearment. Now, granted, no one calls their parents, their foster parents, hey, this is my foster dad or foster mom. Everyone calls them mom or dad or auntie and uncle. Unless, of course, these children are teenagers and brought out when they're 13 or 14, well, that's not their mom and dad, they know it, so maybe auntie or uncle, and maybe they're not happy being there. The challenge with when we try to address issues like this is no cookie cutter solution ever fits every problem. But this is not required by federal law. We found that out in the questioning. In fact, the director came by my office afterwards and we had a very nice chat about the system and the challenges in the foster care system. And she gave me a big hug and a kiss, just so you know. It wasn't adversarial. And she understood what I was conveying. And so you have these short-term foster situations, which I guess are indeed a situation where it is very transient. But the children that are in long-term placement, there's more of a permanency in the relationship and more of an endearing term. I mean, in this body, we say words mean things. There are hurtful words, there are nice words, there are bad words, there's good words, there's words I can't say on the floor because they're vulgar or profane. So words mean things. And I just failed to convince my colleagues, and I do regret that because I had no monetary stake in this. I am done as a foster parent. It is just something I lived through for about 15 years. And now as an adoptive parent, it's very sensitive to me. But there were 4 acts to this bill. That was one. So we determined that it wasn't required by law. So why are we doing it? Well, the best, and I sat there and asked questions, the best I could, the way I can relate it to you, it was sort of this new nebulous kind of collective group thought emerging, not based on any peer-reviewed studies by professors or psychiatrists, just kind of a way we're doing things now, a group thought that this is what we should call it. I know there was testimony from groups that support it, but as I recollect, I was the only foster parent there, or former foster parent, involved in the discussions, mostly government officials. So we're also going to have to go back and, once we do this, come back next year and then clean up all the other statutes that have foster parent in there and put in corrective language, resource caregiver, which to me depersonalizes the relationship with the child and the individual in the care of that child, particularly if it's a long-term situation. So for the purposes of the argument, I'm removing the short-term transient, less than 6 months. And it was related to us that 60% of the children are reunited with parents. Now, I don't know what that figure refers to. Is that a holistic figure? Is that a short-term figure? I don't know. Because there are many children who are taken from mom and dad, they get their act together, they go back, clean bill of health, and we don't see them anymore. The second issue was the ability for these kids to participate in after-school activities. Well, I've never heard of such a thing where kids weren't allowed to practice football or anything like that because the parents would be sued. I suppose it was a problem because it came to us, so, that's never been something I experienced, but certainly I support that aspect of it where children are encouraged to participate in extracurricular.
Mr. Speaker, may I yield my time?
Yes, thank you very much, Representative.
Extracurricular activities. Changing the minimum age from 16 to 14. Well, I think every healthy parent engages in discussions with their children if not on a daily basis, certainly every other day, talk, how was your day? What do you want to do? You know, how are you doing? How's homework? And so I characterize that as that's a continuing parental responsibility to maintain contact with your child. Again, I'm focused primarily on long-term because that's my experience with these children. But it lowers the age from 16 to 14. Now, taken in and of it by itself, that doesn't mean a whole lot, especially if you're a good parent. But again, I go back to what I spoke to previously in this session, 14 becoming the new age of emancipation across all these different bills that we have coming forth. And here is another bill where now the magic age is 14. So my big objection was the term foster parent, turning it to resource caregiver. It was a non-cost item. It didn't really impact anything except the way people feel about it and the way I feel about it. But I failed. The other thing was, as I recall, and I would invite the chair of judiciary to correct me if I'm wrong, the original draft had, I think, complete immunity for either the state or the foster parents and or both. I'm not sure. But that was to me, that was the meat of the bill. That was the meaningful piece of legislation that was sent to us that we needed to look at. And of course, on that thing, we made it easier for the state to be sued, I do believe. I'm not a lawyer, so when they start talking all this legal stuff, I gets deep in the weeds, and that's not my area of expertise. But I think the original draft, and again, I invite correction if I'm wrong, was much harder to sue than this draft. So the meaningless provision, the name change, we leave it in, but the real teeth of it, the threshold for litigation, we actually lowered. And so I felt very disappointed because only one or two people, I guess it was the Hawaii Institute for Justice, or Association for Justice. I think they're the ones that say they have a problem with the higher degree of immunity. We need to lower it to the reasonable parent level, which I have no horse in the fight. But I felt rather useless that all my questions, all my emotion, all my cajoling that went into keeping the name change were unsuccessful. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, members? Representative Thielen?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising with strong reservations on the measure. Mr. Speaker, think of a foster child that is starting kindergarten or first or second grade, and someone says, well, who's that? And the child would have said either my foster parent, my tutu, my uncle, and then the child is corrected and said, no, the State House of Representatives said that you must call that person a resource caregiver. Now that's really stupid. That is really stupid. And as my colleague from EVA said, there's nothing in federal law that mandates us to give that term to a foster parent and make that child have to look at the foster parent as a resource caregiver. That's really an inhumane kind of a terminology. And what are we doing to youngsters? We want to establish warmth and caring relationships, and words mean something. We're taking a step today where we're giving a very cold term to that relationship and telling that child, that's not your foster mom, your foster dad. That's a resource caregiver. And I hope when the bill goes to the Senate, that term disappears. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Ward, followed by Representative Tupola.
Speaker, words do make a difference, and votes make a difference. And having had no vote on this one, I would suggest that the words of the gentleman from Eva Beach, who has raised 8 children, some adopted, some natural, some foster, be inserted in the journal as my own.
So ordered.
Now let me be very clear. I am the father of Johanna May Ping Ward. She was adopted from China 21 years ago. But if anybody called me a resource parent, I would resent that. So the good gentleman said, no one is listening. I listened until it came to my daughter, and I said, yes, this is damning with faint praise by giving it a higher sounding thing, but actually denigrating it by calling you a resource. What are you, a clearinghouse, a banker, an investment banker in kids? Are you a sperm bank that creates people and clones them? Mr. Speaker, this is about human lives, families with children who are mislocated, dislocated, and they're brought in, they're grafted on. There's nothing more closer in my relationship than with me and my daughter. And people say, well, how can you be so close to your daughter? Well, I ask all of you who are married in this house, what is the bloodline between you and your spouse? 0. But the emotional bond and relationship is tight, the tightest it can be. So, Mr. Speaker, words make a difference. Relationships and the way you call them make a huge difference. For those reasons, I will vote no. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Tupola,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In opposition,
please proceed.
as well as my other colleagues that have mentioned many important things about this bill, I also wanted to bring to light that the bill changes the criminal history record check replacement and replaces it with the licensure, meaning that it used to be that you'd had to get licensed to be an operator, employee, or a new employee of a child care or foster system, but this changes it where just a criminal background check is now going to be sufficient. So it does that. It also changes the name, and on top of it, it lowers the age. And I feel for all the same reasons that were brought up right here that this is not the way to go with this one. I don't see that it's necessary, nor is any federal funding going to be lost. So I think that leaving it the way it is, if there was significant amount of reasons or complaints or lawsuits that warranted this change, then I could see maybe why, but with that not being brought up in any of the hearings, it leads one to believe or to understand all of the issues that have been brought up. Why then the need for the change in the name? So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you very much.